I'm Alan Wartes, and this is ThinkRadio Presents ThinkBusiness. My guest today is Brian Riepe.
You know, it's a sport that captures a lot of people that way, where you get on it and you realize it's, the bike was sort of the original as a child. Your bike is your freedom. You can, as soon as you have a bicycle, you can go places.
Right.
And it's a mode of transportation. But you add in this component of excitement to it. Even when we were kids, it was about going as fast as you could or laying a big skid in the trail.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio.
ThinkBusiness is made possible by funding from the ICE Lab at Western, supporting innovative business in the rural Southwest.
If you like Think Business, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. My guest today is Brian Riepe. He's the editor and publisher of Mountain Flyer magazine, a print publication devoted to documenting the ever-growing sport of mountain biking. Though I have to admit there's as much about the art and craft of biking on the Flyer's pages as there is typical sports writing. Brian discovered biking as a geology student at Colorado State University and went on to race professionally for 6 years back in the 90s. After that, he completed a business degree at Western Colorado University in Gunnison and founded Mountain Flyer in 2004. Earlier this year, Riepe sold the magazine to Height of Land Publishing, based out of Vermont. But he still shows up for work in his office every day in Gunnison, Colorado, to put out that next issue as the publication's editor and publisher. Brian, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Well, your bio answers the first question that came to my mind when I thought about sitting down and talking, and that was, are you a biker first or a publisher first?
Oh, I would probably say I'm a biker first.
Yeah.
But it's a hard way to make a living. So you need to find other ways to bring that into your life,
Yeah. So talk about discovering biking yourself. I mean, you were a student at Colorado State. How did it happen that you got on a bike for the first time?
Well, I guess most people, it's hard to even say when you first mountain biked, because when I started biking when I was 4 years old, and I grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and we would ride trails to school a lot of times because there were these little canyons that separated the neighborhoods in Los Alamos. And so when it actually became mountain biking, I don't know. We were riding dirt on our BMX bikes and
right,
and connecting. We were commuting that way essentially to school, and so it grew from there.
Yeah. So when you went to college, then what was it that jumped out and said, okay, now it's called mountain biking, and this is how it's done?
And that's probably a big debate within the sport, even, is when it really started. But that's when I was in I started college in 1988, and that's when mountain biking was really starting to become a little more mainstream. There were people mountain biking before then, of course, but you could buy, commercial bicycles at that point, and I bought a mountain bike to commute around campus on. And there's trails around Fort Collins that we would go and ride, and some friends of mine in our dormitory, we started riding together, and that's when we started really traveling more distances and doing bigger, what you would now consider a mountain bike ride.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, I've talked with people up just north of us up here in Crested Butte, and they like to claim that Crested Butte is the birthplace of mountain biking. And I've seen some old video footage of some of the first trips that these guys took on trails, and they were riding, townies and bikes that we would have just called street bikes back when I was a kid. At what point did it become something that was specialized? I mean, you say that didn't happen until the late 80s?
Yeah, and I don't know when that line would be drawn, but that's when I discovered it, and it was the early days of the sport. But already when I got into it, there was racing, there were national championships, it was starting to explode globally.
So what was it about getting on a mountain bike then that so appealed to you that you wound up actually joining the profession for a few years?
I guess, it's a sport that captures a lot of people that way, where you get on it and you realize it's, the bike was sort of the original as a child. Your bike is your freedom. You can, as soon as you have a bicycle, you can go places,
right.
And it's, it's a mode of transportation. But you add in this component of excitement to it. Even when we were kids, it was about going as fast as you could, or
yeah.
laying a big skid in the trail or whatever, and that you add in a speed component and a skill component. So it just really captures people as far as, having to learn that skill, and you find, as the more you learn how to do on it, you open up your eyes to doing things that you didn't think were possible on a bike.
Yeah, and of course a kid really doesn't care about scenery, but when you get older, you add a scenery component into it. You get access to places that you can travel a distance in a day that it would take you 4 days to walk it.
Yeah, it's about experiencing, being outdoor in the woods, and that's where it differs from, it's different from road biking that way. That I think for a lot of people it's an escape, and it's a way to get out there into nature, and be able to explore areas that you can't get to otherwise very easily. And I think it's all those things combined that made mountain biking. There's really not very many other sports like it that have exploded so quickly in the last decade, or in the last half century even. There's not much that compares. It became,
Well, that's sort of describing
bigger.
The mountain biker as a tourist, the mountain biker as, hobbyist. That's a little different from racing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think especially in this country, the way people mountain bike, racing was a big part of it when the sport was first born. And I feel like the whole sport matured to a point where there's a lot of people, my wife, for instance, mountain bikes 3 or 4 times a week, and she doesn't pay any attention to racing whatsoever. And there's a lot of people like that. There's a lot of people that really, it's a participation sport. Whereas you go to Europe and there's people there that it's, you go to a World Cup race in Europe and the course is lined with 30,000 fans, and you don't see that here. There is still, racing is a big component of it here, but I think the bigger business-wise, it's about the people who participate in it, and they're not interested in watching it. They do it. It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, and would you say that it's a solitary sport? I mean, I ask that question because I know people go out and bike together, but still, you're on a single-track trail. It's you and the bike and the trail right in front of you.
I think it's very much a solitary sport, and you can, you share it with other people if you go with them. But and these days I ride by myself more often than not because of time constraints. I have an hour and a half break. I just get on my bike and go. You don't make the plans, but it's you still see, festivals and events like that are a big part of the sport. And you'll see your friends out there on the trail and stop and chat for a minute and things like that. But yeah, you're on your own.
What in particular was it about racing that appealed to you personally?
Oh, probably a lot of things, and maybe just a little bit of competitive nature in the first place. And it was something that I never did a lot of sports as a kid. I played soccer a little bit. I was never good. I ran track. And it was a sport that I got on a bike and I was good at it. And I was, maybe I had the right genetics and the right mindset that I was able to excel at it.
Yeah.
And, it was a new thing for me to be competitive in a sport like that. And it really, as soon as I found that in myself, that fire, it was something I had to pursue. I took off. And
what do you think about the trend in biking, really in a lot of outdoor kind of pursuits these days, that we're starting to refer to that as an industry? I mean, when people first get into something, you don't think of it like that. It's cool, it's fun, and you go do it. But now, no, seriously, we talk about the outdoor industry, and it's become so competitive in itself for gear and just the next experience? What do you think about all that?
It's hard to balance because part of me, I think it's, there's a lot of overconsumption in the sport and overproduction, and I think there's a lot that makes that happen. There's one, the amount of users grew dramatically in the last 20 or 30 years, and it became big business, supplying the products and needs for people to not just mountain biking, but a lot of outdoor sports grew that way, kayaking and climbing, backcountry skiing. And, there's a lot of money in it, and you see some of these very successful businesses, but there's a lot of appeal for people that I think they want to start a business that has something to do with something that they love and they're passionate about. So you see a lot of cottage industry pop up around, and there's a lot of innovation, especially, mountain biking. It went from the clunkers that you talk about in the 80s to these incredibly high-tech bikes that, I often joke that there's few businesses that spend as much time and money and genius on innovation for so little return. Because it's, in the greater scheme of things, you can make a successful mountain bike brand is making decent money, but it's not like some of these other businesses that really take that much technology.
Well, even though some of these bikes cost many thousands of dollars, the return is not that great for
Well,
these
they probably
companies.
cost many thousands of dollars to produce as well, and if you look at the time to develop a carbon fiber mountain bike with high-tech suspension and mountain bike costs as much as a motorcycle, and that looks strange at first, but if you look at the technology that has to go into making something like that strong enough and light enough to be able to take what people use them for now and the way the sport developed, there's companies that have done well, but in reality, for what this goes into it and the type of technologies, it's.
Well, and would you say that improvements in the experience are marginal also at this point? I mean, how much better can a mountain bike get?
I've been saying that for 10 years, and I'll ride a bike from 5 years ago now, and it's shocking how much worse it is than what the modern bikes are like.
Really? So you've been saying it, but you've been wrong because they are getting better.
Yeah. And, eventually it has to level out, I would think, and there is some other developments now that maybe are changing the sport, and there's a lot of debate about the introduction of e-bikes. They're pedal assist electric mountain bikes, which for a lot of people and myself, I think that's really deviating from the original sport quite a bit. But again, a lot of technology there.
I mean, that would be like power assisted running shoes for a track star or something.
Right.
How could you?
Yeah, I think
really
that's a good analogy.
That?
So and that goes back to you saying, well, it's about the experience, and a lot of the people who are in support of that are saying, well, it's fun, and I'm going out and having fun. So
and there might be people who couldn't get on the trail otherwise.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. And you see, when you're 75 years old, you might be able to get one of these e-bikes and go for a ride without. And in some areas here, we're lucky here. It's not a big controversy because all the trails we ride around Gunnison especially, and most of the trails around Crested Butte are motorized trails. So you can ride a motorcycle. So what's the difference? Where it's causing a debate is areas where bike access is tenuous, and there's the chance that you put e-bikes in there, they could. For a land manager looking at that saying, well, okay, now bikes have motors, it's hard for us to distinguish between an e-bike and a regular mountain bike from more than 20 feet away. We're just going to close the trails to bikes. That's the easiest solution because we're getting conflict now. Bikes are faster. An e-bike essentially is powerful enough. They're pedal assist where, you're pedaling, but it's got a motor assist. So really, you can ride at the pace of a World Cup racer at that point, which is a really fun experience for someone who hasn't had that ability,
Yeah.
So you see the appeal, but you also see where it could change.
Yeah. Well, does that make it more dangerous, though? I mean, because then you're at speeds that you haven't developed that skill.
You better have the skill to go with it, you know. And, but that's people ride motorcycles as well that don't have all the skills necessary.
Well, that's true. I've been run off the trail by a few of those people from time to time. When you said there's a lot of overconsumption, though, what did you mean by that?
Well, and I think that's, the side of me trying to look at the business from an ethical standpoint and seeing that, you see this, huge quantities of this gear being sold at discount through outlets and there's so much competition in it, and there's so many different brands, and you look at, like the apparel companies that, there's hundreds of them, and they're all making, the same stuff, and a lot of it, where does it end up? Where does these things, when you go to a company like, go to see our Trading Post, and there's been this, even Amazon now, you can buy all this gear on Amazon, and there's a lot of, it's not the cleanest industry, creating textiles and carbon fiber mountain bike frames. It all comes from Asia, and it's not it's not immune to all those things either. And I think it's, in this time, I think, and especially because you get a lot of people, just like, Patagonia is a great example in the outdoor industry of really working hard to create an ethical business model. And it's because the people who do these sports care. They tend to, like your original point, that it's about getting out in the woods and the scenery, and everyone would that I know in mountain biking and in all these other outdoor sports would really say that they're environmentally conscious. They have a conservation interest, and they want to protect the areas that they love, and yet the industry itself is not that responsible as a whole.
Is promoting a lot of stuff that's maybe not necessary and maybe harmful in the end. Yeah.
Right. So
that is true of so many industries. But you're right to say that the clientele of a lot of activities and industries are not overtly environmentalist, like I think the outdoor community is, or claims to be. That they really do have an environmental ethic. Do you see trends in the industry moving toward more the Patagonia model of taking a look at sustainability and resilience in
absolutely.
products?
I think, and I think anybody would try, but it's sort of that's the side of capitalism where it's hard to do, because there's, on the one hand, you can't put yourself in a position where you have a weakness because of it. You see products that cost more because of the way they're made, and that's where Patagonia has been successful. And the publishing industry, we're not immune from it either. I would never claim that. And when you fill newsstands with copies, there's and the printing business is not that clean. And we were printing on certified recycled paper, and the cost of that got so high that we couldn't do it in the current environment, and we backed off on that. And there's also a lot of, you have to look closely at those things, whether it's a symbolic effort or it's actually helping.
Yeah, because you've got a business to run. Mm-hmm. A symbolic effort is not good enough. Yeah. It's got to actually do something.
And I think, and the reality of that is probably the best thing you can do is try to produce less and have less waste. And that's really where, and I think it could be a good thing in the long run. I think it's going to be a hard transition, but, you're seeing newsstands die away. I was just reading this weekend that they think Barnes & Noble is finally going to fall to digital. Yeah.
Well,
they're collapsing.
That brings us to the big question that I wanted to talk with you about, and that is, granted, you founded the magazine in 2004, so there's a lot has happened in the last 14 years. But what prompted you to want to get into the print publishing business, knowing that even at that time, some of the signs were already starting to show that digital was on its way up?
Yeah, I guess, looking back on it, if I really knew what was going on, then I probably wouldn't have done it. But
really?
No, that's not entirely true. But I think I had some background in it. My mother was a graphic designer, and she worked on designing a magazine that was produced from the Los Alamos National Laboratory. She worked there from probably 1980 on. And, back when they used to, use before digital, they were, printing from slides and using little rub-on letters to do the design. And and I watched her for all that. So I understood the design side of it, and I understood some about the publishing side. And I had an interest in writing, but I had no education in it. And, so it was really just, I saw a little bit of there was a few mountain bike publications then. One was produced in California and one on the East Coast, and there was really nothing from the Rocky Mountain area. So it really started out as kind of a regional publication. And really the original idea from it came myself and John Brown, who still lives here in Gunnison. He now owns the High Alpine Brewing. We were driving down to a race in Arizona and concocted this idea of like, hey, let's start a little magazine, and he and I talked about it a little bit, and nothing ever came of it. And then he went on to start the Go-To Guide phone book here, and I ended up starting the magazine on my own. Originally, my mother was doing the design work, and then we published, I think, 4 issues that way. And then we were printing it in Crested Butte at Crested Butte Printing. They had a color press up in Crested Butte at the time, and we were doing all the printing there.
So truly a homegrown effort.
Yep. And at the time, Chris Hanna and Steve Mabry were the ones that running the printing, and they liked what we were doing and saw some interest in it, and they were mountain bikers, so they became partners at that time. And then so starting, I think, with issue 5, that's when we started publishing together as a partnership, and they were, involved all the way up until we sold it in May.
So other than sort of this regional idea, you saw a hole here in the Rocky Mountain region, was there something that you particularly wanted to say with your magazine that wasn't being said? Some story that wasn't being told?
It was just telling all those. It was meant to be a journal from the beginning, and it was a journal style where we had freelance writers just submitting stories and tales, and that was really the base of it. But to present it in a way with with the photography and high quality images and design and good storytelling, and we really never changed that model from the beginning, and that.
Yeah, because it's easy to, in any sport, it's easy to think that it's, all about technique, all about equipment, all about, where you manage to go and ride. But really, on the pages of the Mountain Flyer, the human story shines through. I really applaud you for that. It is a beautiful magazine. I mean, the photography in particular is stunning.
Well, thank you. And I think, there's other similar sports where I think that's the sport of mountain biking is just, it brings that out on its own. You don't have to look hard for that. And that's because it's really about that adventure, and there is so much beauty in the sport. It lends itself to that format very easily.
And so did you find then that the audience was really hungry for that?
Yeah.
That they wanted to hear that human story of people out doing their thing?
And I think, and with that, and with the quality presentation as well. And I think that's why, even though, like you mentioned, by 2004, digital was already starting to get a foothold, and it quickly, by 2008, print was already starting to get challenged a little bit, and I think we really, we didn't really keep an eye on that. We were just doing what we wanted to do and the way we wanted to do it. And and really it kept growing even with the economic crash, and it grew steadily from 2004 to 2012. And looking back on it, I can't say we worked that hard for that growth. I mean, we were working hard to make it a high quality product, but we didn't have a master plan. And I think around 2012 was when advertising really changed. I think digital took off in those early years, but advertising hadn't discovered digital yet. And in 2012,
they couldn't figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, and I think social media hadn't really come into play that yet. But 2012 was when we saw that hit, and it was a pretty sudden shock. And
suddenly you had a much harder time finding people willing to invest in print advertising?
Yes. And I think it wasn't necessarily that they didn't want to, but they had other options all of a sudden. So even if they still really liked print, and print is still held steady through that to a certain extent that if done well, print advertising obviously still works because you see a lot of it.
Yeah.
But it's a different style. It's all about quality.
And it's no longer growing. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't have numbers on that, but our numbers really changed, and we felt that hit in 2012.
How did you respond?
And that's when we had to really just start working a lot harder to stay on top of it.
Huh. Well, how does hard work overcome these macro trends that we're talking about in the industry?
We had to learn a lot, and we had to become way more efficient, and essentially we cut costs because we had to at that time. And I think if we had ran things prior to 2012 the way we did afterwards, we probably would have had a lot of money saved up.
So to
weather that storm.
In the business world, challenges frequently are just full of opportunity, and so your experience just supports that idea. What, other than just sort of general efficiency, what sort of big structural changes did you make?
I wouldn't say we made major structural changes. We just found places to save money. Yeah. But we also had to change the way we were selling the advertising. And I think what we're really, and we're still in, that's all still in play. Everybody's still figuring that out. I think you're still seeing a lot of bigger publishers, some succeeding and some not, and smaller publishers too. And there's still a very good business model around the small publishing, but it's changing to, it's consumer supported. It's subscriber supported, and there's going to be less advertising, which I think, in a lot of ways makes that advertising higher value for those who are there because it's not so saturated with it. But, you're seeing a lot of these publications reduce the ad content and make the ratio of editorial to advertising is changing for the better for the readers, and it's making a better product. But what's being asked of the readership is that it's going to be, you're not seeing, you don't see $5 subscriptions for magazines anymore. They've had to cut out those. And again, that goes back to that efficiency of maybe that's better, that we're not overproducing it. If it's being sold at a real value, it's, we charge $22 a year about for a subscription now, where at times we were selling them for less than $10, and that's at a loss. You're subsidizing that with the advertising, or you're
well, and the trend in other digital media, I'm thinking of Netflix, for instance, they charge a subscription, and people are more than happy to pay it because what they get in return is no commercials.
Right.
They don't like being interrupted. They don't like having to sit through that.
And I think ultimately that's the best model for print as well. And I think I like seeing some advertising. If I love a really well designed ad campaign and a really creative ad, I think, and if it's a product I'm interested in, I don't mind seeing it if it's presented well.
Right.
I don't want to be overly bombarded or saturated with it. So I think a small percentage of advertising in a print publication works well, but generally going to that, well, hey, this is what we're doing, and what you're paying for there is to get something that's everything that you want and nothing you don't.
Yeah. Which has really, if the digital revolution has done anything, it's shifted the power back to the consumer in some ways. They're not powerless.
Right.
They are able to vote with their subscriptions and how they consume. So that can't be a bad thing. Unless it puts too many publications out of business.
I think it's a hard transition to make from a publication that was reliant on advertising, essentially, because it's going to be a couple of years or more to make that transition to charging more for subscriptions and convincing the consumers they want to do that. And you're going to have to market it. You're selling a product then really different. In a different way.
Has all of this caused you to shift the story that you tell in the magazine?
I think that's been a great thing for us too, is to just really push for higher quality even, and really think very carefully about what we're publishing, and that it's the very best that we can do, and that's what people are going to be willing to pay for if that quality is that high, and the quality of the photography and the print, heavy paper, a really nice quality product that you want to save and pass around, and that's the model.
Well, it sounds like I already know the answer to this question. based on what you just said, but are you tempted to make the leap to digital?
Well, we've always had a website, and we really haven't. That's the hardest question, I think, for a print publisher is essentially all of a sudden you're put in a position where you had to have two businesses, because the print and the digital almost need to be treated as separate businesses the way they're run. And the way digital is working is almost the opposite of what we're talking about there in print. It's where that's going. The way to make money on a website is doing things that we don't want to do. It's and I think consumers will also realize that online. And there is, first when digital came to be and the newspapers were struggling to adapt to it, they tried to do paywalls and failed. But what I'm reading now and what I'm seeing now is that people are all of a sudden willing to start actually paying for, especially news outlets that they really trust and not get all this junk. And they're willing to pay, a monthly fee for digital, even if it's you're not seeing those ads and you're getting the news stories and the news sources that you really know and trust. And you're seeing a little bit of that in the niche publishing, like what we do, that maybe, I don't know if, a paywall on a website like mountainflyer.com is going to work, because in outdoor sports, what people look for online is just entertainment. And that's why the videos.
They want to see the videos of the extreme rides, the snowboarders, jumping off of 100-foot cliffs and stuff like that.
Right. And, to monetize that has become really tricky, because banner ads don't really work. A lot of people use ad blockers, and they just, the click-through on banner ads is just continuously gone down over the years, to the point now that it's really not what people are looking for. So you have to be very creative in ways to actually bring in any revenue from a website. Yeah. And what we struggle with a lot is what do we put on the website versus what we put on print? If it's a great article, we want to save it for print. We don't want to put it on the website. Right. So, and web is all about it's quantity. It's posting 10 things a day, and it's an entirely different thing than what you do in print, which is well thought out, quality, long form journalism.
Well, there's always going to be an audience for that. I remember in 1978, I was an undergraduate student in a mass communications class, and the professor stood up and predicted that within 10 years, the print newspaper would be a thing of the past. Predictions like that have been made for a long time, and they never, so far,
thankfully,
never have really fully materialized. And I think it's because people do like the experience of holding it in their hand. They do like the higher quality that you can get. And so what's next for you? You've sold the business. What's next on the horizon? You got any big
Well, I'm happy that I'm staying on as the editor and publisher, because I still love what we're doing. And the reason we sold it, there's a lot of different reasons to sell, and it was mostly to get it into a position where we weren't in a position where we thought we could compete in this environment, especially with a single title. It's much harder, and the company we sold to, ironically, the owner and CEO of Height of Land also was a Western State graduate, so there was some connection there, and he had the same type of vision that we had with Mountain Flyer and what he wanted to do with it, and it was a great fit. And it gives us a lot more opportunity having it grouped in with these three other titles. They have climbing title, alpinist, and backcountry ski, and cross-country skier. So it really covers all the range of these outdoor sports and there's a lot of overlap there with the readership. So it was really it was about we didn't want to see Mountain Flyer die, and we wanted it to keep going under the same type of vision that we had, and that was the opportunity to at least give it that chance. And it's a really strong group of people. That are
Brian, I can say I don't want to see Mountain Flyer die either, because it really does stand out among sports magazines for its storytelling ability. So thank you for that. Good work. Keep it up. And thanks for stopping by for the conversation.
We're in a good
today.
position now to make that happen. So,
Yeah. Well, thanks for stopping by.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. There's a lot to talk about with it. So,
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Business.